Welcome to the Museum of Everything podcast. We're Dan and Josh, curators of the Museum of Everything, which is a Florida-based museum dedicated to collecting the widest variety of possible objects across the widest variety of possible subjects. And we're here to discuss culture, art, history, and begin everything with a round of Museum of Everything pub trivia. So, Josh, what's your first question to me?
What were the beaches' code names during the D-Day landings, and who landed at each? I just need the country, not the specific units. Though if you know the infantry divisions, bonus points.
There were 5 beaches, were there not?
There were.
All right, so Juneau was the Canadian beach.
Right.
Sword was the British beach.
Correct.
And then there was you seemed dubious when you were giving me the correct for sword. What's wrong?
Well, there were 2 British beaches.
All right. Well,
but now I'm helping you.
Sword and gold.
Sword and gold, right?
And then Omaha and Utah are the American beaches.
Correct. 5 for 5. Good work.
Okay. My first question to you is, we'll keep it with a World War II theme. Who was the commanding general of the 101st Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944?
That would be General Nuts McAuliffe.
That is correct. How did he get that nickname?
His formal reply, and it was actually the formal reply to the Germans asking for the Americans in Bastogne to surrender, was "Aw, nuts." He crumpled up the memo so he received this letter from the Germans. It was brought to him by his adjutant.
The 101st Airborne was completely encircled. The Americans were taken by surprise in the winter of 1944. The war was supposed to be almost completely over, and then the Germans launched a Christmas surprise attack to try to thrust through the American lines, and it left the American 101st Airborne encircled at Bastogne, which was an incredibly important junction, which the Germans had to take. And
the road to Antwerp and the road west into France. And the reason I happen to be up on this is because I considered asking you this as a trivia question. So the General McAuliffe got his letter from the Germans demanding their surrender, and he said "on nuts" and crumpled it up and threw it away. And then they talked about what the official reply would be, and one of his adjutants suggested that nuts was a perfectly adequate response. So they just wrote, from the commander, 101st Airborne Battalion, nuts. And sent that back. And then the Germans asked, as depicted famously in the movie Battleground from 1949, I think, won the Oscar for best screenplay. Maybe
one of our favorite movies, top 3 greatest movies of all time.
The Germans did ask for clarification whether this was a positive or a negative response, and the fellow responded that nuts could be loosely translated as "go to hell." So that was but McAuliffe was famously one of the only generals in the army who never used profanity. So nuts was as strong as it got for him. And his men were even slightly surprised to hear him use it, I gather.
It was a bold response, especially under the circumstances, and the 101st were able to hold out until Patton.
The reason the 101st was in such terrible conditions was because of very, very bad weather was preventing their being resupplied by Allied forces. So they were not only surrounded and alone, but they couldn't be restocked with ammunition or with food. But Patton famously commissioned the chaplain of the Third Army to write a weather prayer for good weather, and it worked, because after that prayer was issued, the weather cleared up and the C-47s dropped resupplies and the 101st broke through.
And it's a good thing that I didn't ask you. I was planning to follow-up question to ask you what army did Patton command that raced to the rescue of Bastogne. And although the 101st Airborne did not like the view of being rescued, they thought they were completely fine. So they didn't want it to be portrayed as they're having been rescued. Nonetheless, Patton moved faster than almost any land army in history to relieve Bastogne. And accompanied by the weather prayer.
He was one of several generals famous for very fast movement. I would point out that 2 of the other very famous ones were Harold Godwinson, the last English-born king of England, and Napoleon was also very famous for the great speed at which he could move troops around, and the very accurate measurements he could make of the time it would take to move his troops. So clearly a characteristic of a good general. I don't know. It was just something he picked up as a young officer moving artillery around the mountains of Europe.
Well, as I think this is portrayed in the movie Patton, which is also a great movie, although I think it only made our honorable mentions list. But when they asked Patton how quickly he could get to the relief of Bastogne, he said that he could attack with his Third Army in 48 hours, and he's more or less laughed at or told to be serious. But he did succeed in getting there in just over 48 hours, covering over 100 miles in that time. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and remember, it's not just men walking 100 miles in 2 days, which is impressive, but also all the materiel, tanks, supply wagons.
In the middle of
supply
a
trucks.
very bitter winter.
Yes, right, which required a weather prayer to fix.
We should have discussed D-Day perhaps a little bit more than simply to name all of the beaches.
Well, at some point, I figure we'll do a D-Day episode. So.
We definitely should. We'll say that growing up, one of our favorite films, which is on our top 20 greatest films of all time list, is The Longest Day. And,
well, there goes another one of my questions. But
The Longest Day is a great portrayal of a very complex operation, and it's worth watching if you're interested in history. You've probably seen it already.
Yeah, based on the book The Longest Day, which spent 22 weeks on the bestseller list, which is, for a very dense military history subject, very impressive. So, recommended.
Yes. Anyway, all right. So that's one question each. What's your second question to me?
I'm just pulling it up. All right. There's a famous painting of a woman named Lisa del Giocondo, and a pun on her surname provided the Italian and French names for this painting, which you have seen.
Is it the Mona Lisa?
Yes, it is. What are the French and Italian names?
The French name of the Mona Lisa is La Joconde, which means the cheerful one laughing.
Yeah.
And
that's the Italian name too.
Yeah, the Gioconda.
Yeah, exactly. And so her real name was Del Giocondo. So it provided the fact that she was smiling and famously in the painting, and that her last name meant cheerful, provided a very famous pun, which is I think indirectly one of the reasons the painting became so famous. But in any event, good work. That's 2 for 2.
All right. My second question to you is, who was the great designer at General Motors who was responsible for introducing tail fins on American cars, and who also is called the father of the Corvette? Though, among other things, he was the one who decided that America should have a sports car because we really didn't. And so he created the idea of sort of originally copying a British sports car, but we definitely had our own flavor. And then, of course, American cars, famously beginning with the Cadillac in 1948, had tail fins, which ended around 59 with the Cadillac again and the largest tail fins in the business. What is that guy's name?
Zora Arkus Duntov.
No, that's not his name.
Zora Arkus Duntov was the father of the Corvette.
No, the father of the Corvette is Harley Earl. Arkus Duntov was an engineer who worked on the Corvette. However...
And it was his idea, in addition to that, to make it mid-engine, which was finally realized for the latest generation Corvette, and everyone was talking about how this was Zora's dream. That was finally
However,
being
the man who superintended GM at this time, and who did the fins on the Cadillac as well, which this fellow had nothing to do with, was Harley Earl. Harley Earl was a famous GM designer. All of the General Motors cars of the 50s, and indeed more or less the look of American cars, broadly speaking, for that entire decade is owed to Harley Earl. So we'll have to do an episode on American car design, and we can look more into this Duntov guy who no one has ever heard of before.
Everyone has heard of him. He's got a very famous name. I'm frankly surprised you haven't heard of him.
Well, in any event, I'd still say Harley Earl is the correct answer to that question.
I just want to make sure that the answer I have for this next one is right, just because I wrote it without checking the answer. Yes, okay. What country was, until 1971, known as East Pakistan?
What would be East Pakistan?
That's what I'm asking you.
Is it still a country today?
Yeah. Yes. It used to be part of, after the partition of India, it was part of Pakistan, the eastern section of Pakistan. But then in 1971, it broke away.
Is that little country that's shaped sort of like this? I
really don't know what you're describing there. It is one of the most populated countries in the world. Bangladesh. It's because Bangladesh and Pakistan are both Muslim majority countries, and India is a Hindu majority country. So the original idea was to have Muslim British India and Hindu British India, but that didn't quite work out in the long run. I assume Bhutan is Buddhist, but I don't really know.
All right, so I didn't get that question either, we're going to say.
So, so is that 2-2? Was that the third question?
Wait, no, you asked the first question.
Right, yeah, you got Gioconda and Gold Sword, Juno, Omaha, Utah, etc.
Yes, so that was the third question to me. So it's
Okay.
2-1 in my favor.
All right.
And the last question for you is, what well-known cocktail is named after a French artillery piece?
Is it the French 88?
It's the French 75. You're very close, but you ought to know that the 88 was a German artillery piece. It wouldn't be invented until about 30 years later. The French 75 was the first modern artillery cannon, case as opposed to being loaded with first the shot and then the powder and so forth as war style. It was invented at the end of the 19th century, and when people came up with the cocktail, it was said to have as heavy a hit as the French 75, and that's why they gave it that name. I win this round of Museum of Everything pub trivia, and I think we can move on to the topic in hand, which is to continue through our list of the greatest James Bond films.